Dear Anne, it is a tremendous pleasure that I write to you today from the same black, sturdy wooden desk I sat at 30 years ago. Time has drifted slowly past like the clouds in the sky on a lazy Sunday afternoon, but my adventures since I left the academy are still vividly clear to me as a freshly polished pane of glass after a rainstorm. In hindsight, however, I am ashamed to be a part of the imperial machine and to have been witness to the treatment of the slaves and daily violence due to my ignorance and preconceived ideas. From my first sighting of the grandness of the academy, I knew I was different, mainly because of my remarkable skill in mathematics, but also because my father Benjamin, a most gracious gentleman, was a poor clerk. I never was like the son of the Earl of Berwick, who was not known for his academic abilities, but rather his ability to inflict fear on those who were inferior. Ironically, his father's wealth was from the slave trade, something I was quite ignorant about, having never seen a black man prior to my maiden voyage on the Resolution to Antigua. Yet despite my initial shock from their ink-coloured skin, I saw that they were human beings, just like you and me. Extraordinary human beings who could withstand intimidation, cruelty, and pain from harsh treatment. Everywhere I went, I saw black faces, noticing the women were buckling over the laundry tubs in the muddy yards, washing the clothes of white men but no matter how many times they cleaned they couldn't remove the stains of colonization from the clothes. They carefully swayed buckets of freshly cut wood and fruit, yellow, orange, red, all shades of the earth on which they stood above their heads. The men were harnessed to carts, hurling firewood. The skin gleamed with sweat under the hot Caribbean sun like ivory. Their features seemed both exotic and formidable, as if they had been sculptured from an enticing piece of black opal. They spoke, walked, and laughed just as we did. I realized that the British concocted a worldview which was that the idea that the British Empire would collapse if they had not been for the slaves. This idea seemed just as weak as their own faces, yet despite their sturdy structure, they never looked in the eyes of a white man. The racial distinctions meant that these people would never be seen as our equals. I further witnessed undeserving cruelty inflicted from my peers in white officers on those who threatened the might of the British imperial machine. To my dismay, it was soon after my return to the English harbour that I realized that the oath I had taken 2 years ago was more than just words, but rather held the power of life and death. It was rumoured that a lieutenant on the Reginald was contemplating a mutiny, but never committed the act. Yet regardless of this, he was still mercifully hanged. I would forever remember the horror as it could have been me. At the time, my emotions swayed violently, like a compass needle, hiding my shame behind the facade of my shiny gold buttons and blazing red coat. The man's mouth was gaping like a codfish as the bag was forcefully yanked over his head. A sight so sad that tears came into my eyes, tears like shards of glass. His piercing wail was as a shrill of an animal being tortured, but this was a man. The steps underneath him was removed. We were engulfed with a stench of excrement, which filled the noses of all the men standing around the parade. I wish I could release him from his agony, just as I wish I had never watched this horror that continues to haunt me. I was perplexed by my inability to look away from the spectacle. I felt assaulted into numbness. The day I learnt something I wish I had never learnt, that I was compelled to become part of the mighty imperial machine, because to a few meant to become inhumane in another way, either as a bag of meat or as the walking dead. My naivety exposed my romantic dream, a dream that was now shattered. Captain Lieutenant Silk, only the lieutenant once I met him, a man who at first seemed like a comet blazing through the sky. I had met him first on my trip to Antigua. I had hoped to emulate his charisma in dealing with people, as he could turn the most regular event into something entertaining. His instinct to rework an event so that the telling almost became as real as the thing itself had been born in him, like the way I could manipulate numbers. Yet I spent more of my time in his company. I wondered why I had ever wanted to be friends with him. He could not imagine a use for words other than reaching an audience, not the value of the language itself. Before we left for the colony, he had made an arrangement with Mr. Debret in London to publish an account for his adventures. Silk's intentions were entirely different to mine. I felt that he was using our friendship to take his fortune when he questioned me about Gardner and tried to take my notes from the indigenous language. It was as if a brother had betrayed my trust. Beneath his sociable exterior is a heart of cold as remote as side. There is no telling of the lengths he might go to achieve his goal. When I arrived in Australia, my senses were assaulted from the minute I arrived to investigate the Antipodean sky. The observatory was far from my majestic building I had in Greenwich. The land was inhospitable and different from the gentle soil of England. The birds were so loud and raucous in their squawking and shrieking. Red rosellas, white parrots, and laughing jackasses screamed from the ugly, distorted trees. The earth is dun and yellow, incapable of growing our lovely, gentle symbol of England, the rose. Ironically, the new settlement was named Rose Hill. Despite the alien nature of this new land, nothing prepared me for the connection I made with the people who lived on it. Tagaran, a girl of about 12 or 13 years old, reminded me of my sister, Anne, and that was the friend that I wish I had had. We shared a love of learning and language, understanding that a language was more than a list of words, more than a collection of fragments all jumbled together like a box of nuts and bolts. Language was a machine, and to make it work, each part had to be understood in relation to all the other parts. All of a sudden, my meandering with words had an intensity that Tagaran appreciated and responded in like. In Silk's crueling leadership of the horrifying expedition to bring back the Aboriginal heads on Governor's orders, I realized Silk was just another cog in the machine. While I despised Silk for his manipulation of me like a pawn in a chess game, it was as if his working of the imperial machine that awakened my sensibility to recognize the colonial attributes that fueled their ignorance and prejudice towards the Aboriginal people. I decided that I couldn't do it. I couldn't sanction beheading these dignified people, and that night I stood down from my rank as lieutenant and confronted my roar. So, Anne, I miss you dearly, and my life has been like one big chess game, and it's caused me to think if I wanted to be a pawn in a game like Silk, in order to achieve power within the regime, which might have caused me to question, which wouldn't have caused me to question my actions. However, I have learned is that we are all the same regardless of colour or intelligence, and until the colonists' ideas change, we'll continue to fuel the regime with ignorance and prejudice.